conflating skills, destabilizing categories, using foreign objects as suspension of subjectivity, and researching concurrent narratives. She received a Master of Fine Arts degree from Art Center College of Art and Design, Pasadena, California in 1996. Tse's work has been exhibited worldwide at venues, including the Pasadena Museum of California Art, Pasadena, California, Osage, Guangdong, Hong Kong, Cadus Yard, Cambridge, United Kingdom, Icicle, Madrid, Spain, the Museum of Contemporary Art, Minsk, Belarus, Herbert F. Johnson Museum of Art, Cornell University, Icicle, New York, Kaohsiung Museum of Fine Arts, Kaohsiung, Taiwan, Cap Street Project, San Francisco, California, Palazzo del Arango, Rimini, Italy, the Art Gallery of Ontario, Canada, and the Biennale Sierra American, Brazil, MoMA PS1, Long Island City, New York, the New Museum, New York, the Biennale of Sydney, Australia, Institute of Contemporary Art, Boston, Massachusetts, San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, California, 10th Centrum Beeldende Kunst, Rotterdam, Netherlands, Parasite, in Hong Kong, Govett Brewster Art Gallery, New Plymouth, New Zealand, and many others. She has been selected to represent Hong Kong in the 2019 Venice Biennale, the first woman to present a solo show in the Hong Kong Pavilion at the Biennale. She was a recipient of the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation Fellowship in 2009. She has been a member of the faculty at California Institute of the Arts since 2001 and has been recently named the Robert Fitzpatrick Chair in Arts. And let's welcome Shirley.
Good evening. Thanks for the introduction, and I want to thank Rebecca Ripple and the Sculpture Department for giving me the opportunity to share my work with you tonight. And I tend to talk a lot, and so I don't want to make this to be like a 3 hours long lecture. So I want to focus on tonight on the my work at the Hong Kong Pavilion for the Venice Biennale. So the plan is to sort of go through the earlier work fairly quickly, and then we'll jump into the Venice Biennale presentation. So here is a title card for the talk. So it basically summed up the trajectory of my practice in the last 20 plus years. And so it's from plastic to plasticity, from polymer to polysemy, from multiplicity to negotiation, and from philosophy to economics. And basically, you can see that there is like movement from the material to ideas, and from the object to event or an activity or an act, and so forth. But if you look at this words, this language here, it tends to give you an idea that I'm moving from one point to another as if it's completely leaving the other point, but it's actually not that way. You will see. So this has been a running joke all day long that I will come up here and start singing, and I will not, but indeed I do have a slide that related to music. So if you look at the four pairs, how I see the transition or the trajectory of this movement between the two things is more like a fader knob on a mixing panel. So it's never really completely leaving one end to another. It's always already a mixture or a combination between these two. So meaning that when in the early works, I might be focusing on using a lot of plastic materials, the polymer, but it doesn't mean that I'm always interested in the idea of plasticity from the get-go. So it never really depart from that. But maybe it's about emphasis on the idea of plasticity in the later work and leaving the choice of using synthetic polymer aside. So that's kind of more like that. And then in terms of the idea that I'm interested in plasticity, I'm mostly really curious on the sort of paradoxical quality of plasticity. It can be everything, it can be nothing. And then, and philosophically, I see it as an idea of multiplicity. And then that is from the early days. But it's interesting to talk about, also with multiplicity, it's also imply differences. So, and in the early days of my career, I was thinking about differences and how they kind of exist side by side. That's kind of how I see it. But then it can become really abstract. What does that mean to put differences together? It's as if you need like a interlocutor or some sort of godlike subject to put these things out there. But that doesn't, you know, it becomes kind of free-floating. Like, what do you mean by talking about differences? It's like so free-floating. So in the later years, I got really interested in studying economics. And then when I talk about economics, it's not finances. It's not about money. It's more like macroeconomics, which is like the study of how to align resources or allocate resources in a different way. And capitalism is only one model out of many possible models. So, and then when I think about the idea of differences within economics, it actually allowed me to ground myself in one position to look at other things in relation to this. So I got really interested in the relation between this entity that does not need a third subject, a godlike figure to tell the narrative of these things are different. So that's kind of like, oh, thank you. That's sort of the overall concept of the thing. And then now, this first slide went all the way back to actually graduate school. So this is the work that I did in graduate school at Art Center. And then I show you that I don't always start with plastic from the beginning. This is brass. But I always work with the idea of plasticity and multiplicity and differences from the get-go. So for example, this piece, I went to Home Depot and I got a bunch of brass fixtures. And then I was really curious about how this sort of DIY fixture has a sort of standardized quality to it. So if you want to build your home bar and, you know, this sort of things, then you can buy the component. But I was really unsatisfied with this sort of standardized quality of these things. So I thought, you know what, I know how to braze brass, so I just end up, you know, taking this part and really mess with them, bend them and weld different parts together. And then you notice that one of the supports, so to speak, is a chain. So it becomes so, the desire to make them different is so much that it does not function as a support. So it becomes non-functional. So that's really important in the later work as well. And then moving forward, this is like maybe the first work I did after grad school. And since a lot of you are in grad school here, I think it'll be interesting for you to see some of how the work that you've done in school might end up developing in later years of your life as an artist. So at this point now, I'm really interested in multiplicity and multiple subjectivity. So I've been always curious about these styrofoam packaging thing because they look so alien, but then you see them in dumpsters. And at one point, you know, there was a running joke among my friend that, oh, Shirley's Fridays. That means that Best Buy is getting rid of the styrofoam. You must be dumpster diving that night. So I was like, yeah, so you want to come with me? So help me. So I collected all this styrofoam, and then it's curious to me because as an artist, we always think about artists having intention or ideas, and then you kind of execute it throughout the process. You end up having a product with decision-making process that's solely made by the artist. But looking at styrofoam like this, I was curious about, why is all these holes in them? And then why, you think that this should be the negative for the positive shape of electrical appliances or computer, what have you. But I don't know how many of you are trying to return your TV back to Home Depot and try to put the styrofoam back into the box. It doesn't quite fit. And because obviously there's a lot of shape that does not go with the, or there's just like a different, I want to get to details of this piece. So I actually went through a process of researching why those forms are made, because you can see, is there a cursor here? Yeah, okay. So you can see these are, I call them nipple shaped, because this is like the positive or the male component, and if you look at the bottom of the block, there's a negative or the female part to it. And I was like, why is that? It has obviously have nothing to do with that computer I bought or that TV I bought. So it took me all the way to calling someone from Hewlett Packard, from industrial designer, and he was really patient on the phone with me and explained, well, so these things are actually for the styrofoam block to link up to each other for ease of transportation, because they need to be transported before they are packed individually. And then I asked him about this giant hole in the corner, and then he said, look, we're talking about industrial scale injection molding, and for this purpose, we don't really need a solid corner. So if you're thinking about saving production cost, so this is why the corners have these big holes in order to save cost. So in a way, the outcome of this shape is a convergence of functional reason to fit in that computer or TV, and then there's a transportational reason for this to be shipped, and then there is a economic reason. So I'm really interested in this sort of convergence of multiple subjectivity in deciding the final outcome of the look of this thing. And then I told you this long story. I didn't really tell you what it is or what this sculpture really is like, because I thought this shape, the complexity of this shape is what I really draw the viewer attention to. So I went through the trouble of cutting out vinyl material, almost like making upholstery for them, and then cover all the block with using spray adhesive. So basically I traced every single facet of the styrofoam block and then cut them out and then glue it onto the block. It's really laborious, really labor intensive. And then I even cover the inside of the hole too. So it's pretty insane kind of OCD work, so. And then I'm gonna move forward a little bit. There's also part of my, in the Venice installation, I was doing some sculpture outdoor, and it's actually one of the very first time that I've shown outdoor sculptures, but it harkens back to my other work that I would place sculpture in landscape, and I take photograph of them. So these does not exist as sculpture. These are photographs. So I've shown them as photography. And then they usually come in a series. And for me, this has less to do with the obvious contrast between the natural and man-made, and of course it is there. So, but it's more about looking for the site of sculpture. Because if you see this sculpture indoor, I don't think you even, it will just look like an object. But it becomes really strange when you put it outside in nature. So I'm wondering, what is the site of sculpture? And this site does not mean physical site. Maybe it's a social one, it's a political one, and what have you. And then this work is up to 2000 now, so we have a long night. Okay. This is called Polymathic Styrene, is 2000. And it's made of polystyrene that is used for wall insulation. And it is done by using a handheld router. So there's no, I just saw your shop. There's a beautiful CNC machine. I didn't use any CNC. This is all done by, kind of old-fashioned handheld router. I have a bunch of different jigs to it. So, and it lined the wall of the galleries, and I think it's, at one point it was, it could be in different configurations. So in this configuration, it's about 200 feet long. It lined around the gallery space, and they have different thickness, different length of the panel. And this is like one of my very early attempts of trying to put all the differences together under one roof. And so if you look at some of the details, some of them are very abstract. And it's almost like mark making. So in this slide, actually I was just using a router and going freehand. And that was really interesting to me because on one hand, it's almost like making three-dimensional drawings. So I was actually drawing in foam. And then on the other hand, this is like, actually a lot, my undergrad, I didn't really study sculpture in undergrad, so this is done, this is done after grad school. But anyway, my point is that I never really have any formal training in sculpture, to be honest with you, so a lot of these process is totally self-taught, including using the router, which is a pretty sophisticated, woodworker tools. And in the early days, I was losing patience of working with the wood grain. This is really funny that when you see my Venice presentation, that I thought, oh, what if instead of routing on wood, I would just route styrofoam, because styrofoam have no grain, so there is like all this gift to it, so you can go back and forth. You don't have to worry about the feet. It's in router. So in a way, I see this work as my sort of subversive desire to mess with the father's tool, so to speak. So with styrofoam, you can just, throw your router on the styrofoam, it will do something. So, and then that was abstract, and then this one is starting to look like maybe a landscape, some sort of three-dimensional landscape. And then some of them are very shallow, so it does look like a drawing, and I'm trying to mimic bubble wrap, because I also use bubble wrap in my other work, so it's just a little bit self-referential. And then that work, because it's also very labor-intensive, it took me about 2.5 years, to make that work. I didn't have an assistant, I did all by myself, using a router and jig. And so in a way, the plan is to try to have as many differences as possible. So I want to have representational, non-representational, micro scale and macro scale, and something more organic, something inorganic, and something very rectilinear and something very curvilinear. And so these are just the mental checklists that I have. But in reality, over the 2.5 years, it become almost like a visual diary for me. So I would go around and, look for inspiration. And I think this panel came after my first visit to Legoland in San Diego. So I was really impressed by, I don't know what any of you been to Legoland. It was kind of amazing that there's a cafeteria that is in the face of Albert Einstein. And then from a distance, there's no mistaking that is Albert Einstein. But when you up close to it, just before you walk into the building, it's so abstract, you can't tell what it is. But so anyway, so there is like one example of me using, things that I see as a sort of visual diary. And you can see the support also made of foam, and some of these support are very Baroque, and then some of them are very modernist. So there's a contrast to it. And from the same panel, this is a rather large, I think it's like 12 feet long. You can see that either, because it's installed in a circular way inside this room, the viewer could either read from left to right or right to left. So for this panel, then it could be read as going from chaos to order or order to chaos at the same time. Actually, some of you know Chinese here. I don't know if you can tell there's some hidden language in there. I'll tell you after dinner. So these are actually borings or marks that made by the router bits. And then this is a really important panel, and it's kind of like a, an insider joke to myself that I would tell people that this is like the legend, as in like a map of that it shows you. This is at one point. This is the collection of all the router bits that I have, and that's important to me because I, beside the concept of multiplicity, and then this sort of like converging subjectivity between, a human subject or something that is mediated by, system or machine. I actually rarely use my own hand. I mean, in terms of using my artist paw, like holding a pencil to make drawing, that kind of thing. But I would draw with a machine. I would use manufactured item to make drawing. And because I think this is like a good example that if you're drawing with the router bits, then the router bits comes in very standardized dimension. They either like a quarter inch or half an inch or what have you. So it's I like that reference to the system or the program society we lived in. So it's really important that I show there is the trace of the manufacturer in this piece. And this shows you a different installation, which is a little smaller, and then you can see how, oh, that's right. It's really important that I install at waist height because the idea is that I also want to incorporate time in it. So the concept for the installation itself is when you walk into a room, I don't want you to be able to consume the sculpture in one single gaze. So you cannot see the piece, really. It's just one line. So in order to experience the sculpture, you must use your body and walk through the space in time. It's almost filmic in a way to see the piece. So your experience of the sculpture is actually a composite of all these moments that you stitch together in your brain, so to speak. So it is very filmic or cinematic in that sense. So that's important. And then you can see that in terms of the installation strategy, so this gallery space have a bigger space and a smaller space, the smaller gallery. And the piece actually blocked the entrance of the smaller gallery. So you can't even walk. I mean, there's another door through the front space that you can walk into the smaller gallery, but it just kind of show you that this is a recurring language I use in terms of installation, that I like to intervene the architecture of the space. And you will see that in Venice as well. So it's like all the way back to year 2000, I was already doing that, blocking that. So you can actually have access visually, but not physically. And in a smaller room, there's another series of photographic work that is titled Diaspora Touristy. You see, it's already 6:25. All right, Shirley, move quicker. All right, so this is a series, and then, so now this is Shelf Life, 2002. It's a commission by Cap Street Project in San Francisco. I think, Sam, you might have seen this piece, when you saw. And then this piece, unlike the last piece where you use your body and kind of walk around the room, I want to make a sculpture that's so huge that in order to see the sculpture, you have to be in it. So you see what I mean. You have to remove your shoes, you climb up, and then there's some indentation. There's a slide coming up. You can show the scale. So this is actually vacuum form. So when I saw a vacuum form machine, I was like, oh my God, I wish I had that machine. But I actually end up doing this fabrication at the Warner Brothers studio in LA, because like the movie studio have that kind of equipment, and this is memory foam, so it's important that I'm holding the impression of the viewer's movement, maybe for a long minute before I revert to level. And so this shows you the scale. So again, the sculpture blocked the entrance. The only way for you to experience the sculpture is to climb up and to be in it. So, and then this is a pretty site-specific piece. And when I was invited to do the commission, I saw the spray foam in the ceiling. And then I joked to the curators like, oh, the ceiling's already covered with foam. The work is already half done. So all I need to do is to make styrofoam in the bottom and then sandwich the viewer together. Then you have this, I'm just packaging, instead of packaging, computer, I'm packaging viewers' movement and experience. So that was kind of the concept for this piece. And, little kids love that indentation. So anyway. So this installation is from 2004. It's called Power Tower. So this is slowly moving towards plasticity and then my interest in using narrative. So you will see the former two work, they are rather abstract, and there's not a lot of figure to it. So, but this is like the beginning of using the figure narratives and so forth. So these are made of HDPE, the white board that you might be familiar with it in the kitchen, that is the material they use for cutting board. So I bought them in bulk, and I basically cut them into bars and constructed them that way. And then this is like a collection of 6 different power transmission tower that I researched. And the design went all the way from the first power plant in US in Buffalo in 1901 all the way to the more recent one. And so it's roughly based on the design of power towers. And then you can see a detail of the screws, and the screw is covered by, instead of wood putty, it's covered by silly putty. So in time, the silly putty is like oozing out, and then it's all connected through this crazy hub form. And then for this is 2004, so quite a long time ago, but back then, there's something called exhibition invitation that is in paper form or like in printed form. So my announcement for the show is actually a postcard, which is this didactic diagram. And by then I have been already teaching for quite some time. And then my student will always, I work with different students, but some students are so afraid to talk about their work or quote unquote explain their work, as if the moment they apply language to their work, then all the mystery of their work would disappear. So in a way, this is a little joke that I done to my students. It's like, wait a minute. So you know what? I can explain power towers to you through this didactic diagram, but I'm confident enough that the sculpture can stand by themselves, even though I give you a lot of background information and what they've referred to. It doesn't take away the phenomenological experience of going through the installation, hopefully. So basically, kind of, I don't know if you can read any of these things, but it has a kind of convoluted research of thinking, also something personal, and there's a paradox to it, because something about me, this is like experiencing an artist block. I didn't know what to do anymore. I was totally exhausted, and then one day it just dawned on me that if I don't have energy, if I don't have power, why don't I just build a power plant in my studio? So it's kind of like a pun, like a visual pun to myself. It's like, oh, okay, I can just build a power tower. But at that very moment, I have no idea how power tower is going to relate to my styrofoam work previous to that. but I trust my process. I think sometimes, I mean, I don't work entirely intuitively, but from time to time, I think you need to trust your intuition, because that is one way for you to open up new space for you to get back to the trajectory or the discourse that you're interested in. At least that's my experience. So, and interestingly enough, once I started making power towers, and of course, it has everything to do with plastic, because the first large-scale electricity transmission wouldn't be possible without the invention of synthetic rubber. So it's just really fascinating. And then I think I'm going to skip this work. This is, yeah, so this is like it's called Intermission, but anyway, I'm going to skip it. All right, so let's move forward to, maybe we'll show a little bit of this video from that. And then it's meant to be shown in a really small monitor, so this actually does not just do justice to the actual work, which is really blown out, but you can see that it proves that. I'll give you that clip again. Yeah, so it kind of proves that. Well, I mean, that installation is a bunch of booths shaped, and then each booth contains a sculpture that has significance to my life, and then it's named after a place that has significance to me, and then this is actually named Rome, because I didn't put this trash in there. It's actually trash that's been caught in a waterway in Rome, Italy, and so it's just calling for me that it's like a happenstance, and then I filmed it, and I turned it into this that is sitting inside a styrofoam cooler with a bunch of beads inside a booth. So, but let's move forward. Oh, someone talk about Icicle. Maybe I should show this. So this is wait, there. This is also photographic work, and it's called Waiting at the Place Where America Parts from Eurasia series. And it was done in 2005, and then it was shortly after, I don't know, this might be before your time, that George Bush was reelected again, and I was really upset because I actually at that time was doing a lot of work trying to rally for the Democratic candidate in the early days was Howard Dean. But anyway, so feel really powerless at that point, and then the general sentiment is that there's nothing we can do. All we can do is to wait. So there's a little waiting around, and then because I was doing power towers, I was trying to do research on energy production and stuff like that, and then I came across a slide of people bathing in front of a power plant. I was like, why are these people bathing in front of a power plant? It turns out to be the Blue Lagoon in Iceland. And then that is totally geothermal, so it's safe to be, in that water next to the power plant. It's like no pollution. So I did a series of placing this foam bench in Iceland with the Icicle. So someone was just asking, is it Dominique asked me about the Icicle? So that is, there you go. And that's that. So, and then this is 2007, and then again, it's moving towards more figurative. So this is from a show called Sink Like a Submarine. And in this show, I was really interested in using material that associated with military technology. And yeah, so quickly, this piece have embedded, okay, there. It's a mixture of cast resin with this sort of, this shape here. This shape here is actually found, and it's actually a factory reject part for a submarine. And And a friend of mine actually got it from Wisconsin, from a factory that is rejected. I think something wrong with the part, but it's meant to be a mount in a submarine. And they sent it to me, and it turns out to be high density injection mold resin. And anyway, so I incorporate with that, and then and inside a sculpture, there's a heart organ that is made of jade. And in this instance, I didn't do it myself, so I farmed it out. I actually went to Hong Kong, where I'm from, and I find a jade master and have it carved. And so, but the story was kind of funny because I already had that submarine part in that greenish color, and to me it looks like kind of ancient jade ritual item from China. And then I went around the jade market in Hong Kong, and I was looking for actual jade material to match it. And then it was kind of confusing to them because it's like, wait, usually you use plastic to mimic jade. You mean you want me to find a jade that mimic this plastic? I was like, yes, that's what I want. So that there you go. That's that paradox. And then there is another piece. I'm going to move forward to. So in the same show, I also have something that is more representational because I'm trying to address military technology. So there's a piece that kind of looked like tank track to it, but it's sort of funny because inside is sculpture, this like mini globes in them, and one of the mini globes is actually not mini globes, but a world map made of paper that has been crumbled to mimic a mini globe. I don't know if it makes any sense to you. Anyway, so I am going to move towards Quantum Shirley. So fast forward to, now we're up to 2009 or so, and then because of my turn towards using narrative and the idea of plasticity and connections between things, I was starting to actually mine my own history for ideas in my work. And so quickly, there is I don't have time to tell you the whole family history, but my family had, part of my family is from Southeast Asia, actually, and they participated in plantation that served the colonial era, and some work in the rubber plantation, and some work in the vanilla beans plantation. And then at one point, I was almost not born in Hong Kong. I almost was born in Tahiti, but it's a long story. But anyway, but I always imagine in the quantum world that almost the if actually did happen. It's just that it exists in a parallel universe. So I always imagine there's another Shirley from Tahiti. And that, it's just that because I'm only limited to the perception that I live in this reality, so I have no access to the other Shirley, but she does exist. I'm totally convinced. So anyway, and I was reading Scientific American, the magazine, and the way that they explain quantum physics to the layman is that if you put a playing card, if the playing card falls, it actually falls on both sides. And it's called a collapse of the wave function, meaning that both actually simultaneously happen. You just have no access to the other way. So that is, so in this series, it's ongoing. I'm still doing Quantum Shirley, so it's like a framework that allow me to make work under this sort of convergence between personal history, the Chinese diaspora in the colonial period, quantum theories, and there was one more. Oh, and then the material, the trading. And under this series, I've done a number of sculptures, and so this is another series under Quantum Shirley using foam and laser cut that using text and work that sort of laid out a map. And sometimes the work under quantum Shirley is quite abstract. And for example, this piece is called Squaring the Circle, and roughly is using a middle-age mathematical riddle, where back then the scientists or mathematicians trying to convert a volume of sphere into square, but they're not successful. So they end up having pi, 3.141619, I can't remember. So in this case, this is like a sculpture to entertain this sort of conversion or translation between two different worlds, and then you always end up something with surplus. So, and then in the series, I also done lecture performance. I don't have time to show the other work, but it's actually, this is like the second time using the lecture performance format. And then there is a video that goes with the performance and so forth. And now I want to quickly show this work before the Venice project now. So this is back, this is in 2016. And it's my solo show at Shoshana Wing in LA, and the title of this piece is Lift Me Up So I Can See You Better. And what you see is a bleacher, and then it's occupied by a number of sculpture, and then there's on the other side, there's a number of sculpture that's popped up by different kind of stands. And on the one of the tallest one is actually a sculpture that based on the book by Oscar Wilde called The Happy Prince. Not The Little Prince, that people are conflating two story. I was meeting with, Pepper. This morning we're talking about fables and story, and yes, so it's the Happy Prince. It's to kind of talk about income inequality, and then the idea that if you are on a higher, if you know the story, you know that. Actually, well, the way that I know the story when I was a kid, but when I'm rereading a story as an adult, the first thing that struck me was that, oh my God, this is not about the shiny rubies or precious stone, but it's about the position of seeing. Because once the prince was elevated to a higher level, he was able to see all the mystery in his town. So the idea of being lifted up higher, so you gain the perspective of seeing the larger picture, is the key component for this show. And it's my first ever attempt to make a figurative sculpture. It's meant to be really crude, and it's made of paper mache. And yeah, so, but all the stands and the sculpture being popped up on tripod and the idea of position seeing will be important in the Venice presentation. So this piece is literally titled Income Inequality, because I have like a big piece of paper that I gesso it and crumble into a piece of paper. It's about 4 feet wide, but it's held together by genuine gold bracelet that they're gift to me from my sister. They're almost like dowry to me, that my sister was like, keep the gold, it's like, the money can depreciate, but you can always have gold. So in a way, it's sort of like, this gold chain keeping this crumbled piece of paper together. Okay, so, well, this piece is called Jade Tongue, like combining styrofoam with jade, and it's sort of figurative, but this piece actually ended up to be in the Venice presentation, so. All right, I think, and then this piece as well. There's actually 3 pieces I recycle from this show that I use in the Venice presentation. So this is called Optic Nerve, and it's quite abstract, and it's made of this kind of shiny vinyl material, but it's loosely based on a drawing of optic nerve that I see in an anatomical diagram. So. And this piece is not in the Venice Biennale, but it is the very first time I was using wood and I turned it. So this is the very first piece that I incorporate wood turning into my work. So, Anyway, all right, so we're running out of time, so I need to move to the Venice project now. So here. So the show is called Stakeholders, and like I talked about in the very beginning, I was at one point I got really interested in economics and how that instead of philosophy, which could be so free-floating and not grounded, if we think about these sort of relations that you have to position yourself and then see your relation to the other, then you enter into some sort of negotiation with each other, then you both have agency. And in economics term is seen as a stakeholders because you're holding stake to something. And the point of being a stakeholder or having agency, the point of having agency is to acknowledge that other people have agency too. So it's not just your own agency, it's other people's agency too. So how do you negotiate between different people's positions and their, in each and everyone's terms is a form of art, literally. So anyway, the Hong Kong Pavilion is directly across the alley from the main space. And the space is actually in a residential area, which you can see that is 3-story high, and then on the top floor, people are still living there. So it's actually I actually really like this space because it has this sort of very warm, lived-in quality to it. It's not a white cube. I've done show in a white cube, and it's actually much more interesting for me to do a space that is not a white cube, and people are still living there, and there's like clothing lines, and those clothing lines are used. So, and I was invited to do both an installation in the courtyard outside and then the indoor space. The ground floor is the indoor venues. So, and because the last show that I came out from is about position of seeing, I immediately think that I must make a piece that I would draw the viewer attention to the clothing lines. So it was very clear to me that from the beginning, we use the sculpture language of using very kind of stand that is telescopable, so that when you look at a sculpture, you're actually turning your head, and then you follow the sight line towards the clothing lines, and that's really important to me. And then because I'm also representing Hong Kong, so I want to follow my trajectory of the interest in narrative. And then from the Quantum Shirley series that I'm interested in the colonial history, that I remember as a kid, I lived in Hong Kong until I was 20, so I actually have lived in the US now longer than I lived there. But one of my favorite memories of living in Hong Kong is I have 4 other siblings, and then we would play street badminton in Hong Kong. And it's often really fun because if you play street badminton, there's no net, and then it's oftentimes really windy, so there's actually no rules. You just play the game for the sake of having fun. You're not really competing. And so there's a quality of not adhering to rules, not adhering to programmed, and then it's also reclaiming public space. It's really interesting to me. So I really want to, and the next, actually this is not until later that I started to do research on badminton. I mean, as a kid, I always associate, badminton must be from Asia because like Asians love playing badminton. And not until I started to do research on it, it turns out that badminton was indeed invented in British colonial era of India, where they combine, actually the shuttlecock is quite an ancient game from Asia, but then they combined it with a racket. The British combined it with racket, and they're born badminton. So it's a sport came out of the colonial era, but I didn't know as a kid, and I just was always associated with Hong Kong. So it's really interesting for me to do that. So I thought for the outdoor installation, I would just create a imagined scenario of playing a game of street badminton. And then, like street badminton, you don't have nets. And what I did, or we did as kids, we would just grab some, a broom or garbage can, and then we're pretending to be the net. So this is kind of like, the sculpture can be some sort of net in the middle. So this is kind of how it looks. So, and then that's the bleacher that come back in this form. And in this time, the viewer is actually invited to sit on the bleacher. And then to continue on the idea of reclaiming public space or public domain, and then also the domestic quality of the space. You actually oftentimes hear people talking on the phone in the courtyard, or the washing machine is running. This sort of everyday soundscape is so rich that I want to echo that. So I brought in armature radio, actually. Oh, you can see one day it actually had really colorful clothing lines. And so there's some details. And so under the bleacher, I installed a functional armature radio there. And then it's actually, I don't know if you can see, maybe hard to see from the installation shot. So two of the sculptures are actually functional radio antennas. So, but we're not allowed to transmit because you need license, but you are able to hear contact made by armature radio operator in Europe. So that is kind of ongoing and on a low level. And just want to show you, the rackets are a found object, but I intensely look on eBay for the right kind of racket, and I came across this brand name Victoria. And I don't know if you know, the old name for Hong Kong is actually Victoria during British colonial era. So Hong Kong was a British colony, if you know. And then another brand name is Imperial. So, and actually this racket has been kind of broken, sort of like breaking the Imperial. And then I want to show you, the shuttlecock. So this is actually titled Shuttle Pot, and it's made of cast rubber. I cast the top of the shuttlecock in rubber, but the feather, so to speak, is actually vanilla beans. So it's a combination of my family history of participating in colonial labor in one point. And then this is a piece called Bamboo Extension. So it's actually recycled from that the show that I did for Lift Me Up so I can see better. And it actually has glass. In the last show that I use a lot of glass chunk for the eyes, so to speak, in this sort of figurative sculpture. So it's as if the bamboo is not tall enough that we need to extend it with plastic for these eyes to see. And then we have about 6 minutes to talk about the indoor piece. The indoor piece, did I tell you the title of the outdoor piece? I actually didn't tell you. The title of the outdoor piece is called Play Court. So, playground, but they've been calling it the courtyard, and I'm really interested in the word court because it have different kind of meaning to it. So play court instead of playground, so anyway, so the indoor installation is called negotiated difference. It's kind of clumsy, but it's not negotiation of differences. It's called negotiated differences. So the idea is I should tell you that it's made of hand-turned spindle made of wood, and then they're all connected by 3D printed connectors or joints. And the spindle part is all wood, right? So different, like 40 different species of wood, and they're not stained. The colors are what the species are. And the connectors or the joinery, 3D printed in wood, metal, and plastic. Yes, so the idea is to make, because you actually should show you the images first. the indoor space is kind of like a series of interconnecting rooms. So I had this idea of making like a rhizomatic structure that meander through the whole space, but it's connected as one organic piece. So it's really is one piece. It's not three different pieces, even though there's 3 rooms. And then that you can see, here's the details of what I'm talking about. So the wood part are hand turned on a lathe, and then how they're connected is through 3D printed thing. And then here's that will show you. So if you remember from the last slide, so there is an archway in the indoor space, and I block it, so you're not able to walk through the sculpture, but then through the archway, you kind of see that, oh, there's more going on in the other room. So that hopefully you will notice to go back to the courtyard and enter it through this room. We'll have a second set of door that you go through. And then when you go through here, you will see this part of the installation and then walk through that doorway to the other room. And here you actually see a close-up of a bowling pin set. So within the wood carving, it's kind of like harkens back to polymathic styrene, that my plan is to put as many different kind of differences together as possible. So I want, wood turning is fairly new to me, but once I picked it up, I cannot quit because it's really addicting. It's really meditative. And so there's infinite number of possibility of things you can. Well, wood turning basically is like spindle turning or bowl turning. So I want to focus on spindle turning. And within spindle turning, there's so many things that you can turn. So I end up doing a bunch of research on what are the objects that has been turned on a lathe throughout history. Actually, go back all the way from ancient China and as well as North Africa. And actually, a lot of wood turning is done in Morocco, and I actually took a trip to Morocco to look at some of that as well. And the bowling pins happen to be a more modern days way of using wood turning on an industrial scale, and they would sandwich the wood and then turn them on large scale. So anyway, so the spindle are combination of representational object, recognizable object, abstract object. Some of these spindle look like practices, actually in a way, the whole show is a record of my learning as a wood turner. So you can see some of this process being done in the early days when I'm quote unquote unskilled to, 3 years later, I'm a little better on the lathe and it look more perfected. And then because of the biennial, I also got some funding for me to hire an assistant that helped me to do some of this carving. And he's gotten really good too. So, and here, not only the different kind of carving, I want to address the different forms. So I also want to encompass both domestic object, and there's like flower rolling pins and prosthetic legs and sport equipment. So the idea is in the same cluster, you can see a cue stick will turn into a baseball bat and turn into a flower rolling pin and turn into a prosthetic leg, and then it keeps turning and turning, transforming to the next thing. So that's the idea. And then this is a shot from the other side of the archway. And so I saw a ice hockey stick in one of his studios. It's like, hockey stick. It's like right here. Here, you see that? So, meaning actually not all the wood is done on a lathe. So some of them are hand carved. So maybe 10% are hand carved, but the end of the hockey stick is turned on a lathe. And so I'm just going to show you a bunch of details, I guess. So a lot of baluster, architectural details, like table legs, a lot of table legs. And, I'm also combining, some of the furniture legs are actually a Ming Dynasty table leg, which is not done on a lathe, so have to be hand carved because they're more like a block, like a square shape. So, so this is a shot of, because it's in Venice, so I also have one as a gondola or the pedal in the middle. And, that's another detail of the bowling pins. And, some of them, it really show the origin of what the wood is, like literally a log. And this is the very colorful session where there's a numbers of red heart or purple heart that I use. And then some of the metal printed 3D drawings purposely age through oxidization. And it's funny because at the end of the biennial, we had like a 60 years, once in a 60 years time flood. So actually some of the work got some water damage to it, and it's really confusing to the staff that's like, now I can't tell whether this connector is done by you or done by the seawater in Venice after the flood. So, and that's sort of funny to me. And so again, it's sort of like a visual diary that throughout the last year and a half, I have this mental checklist of putting different kind of differences as possible. Some of them is influenced by my inspiration of every day, and then at that time, this is actually a gavel when Nancy Pelosi, the Democratic Party won the House, and Nancy Pelosi was holding a gavel, and it was like, what is that? We can turn it on the lathe, and then we turn it. I should have a picture of that. So we almost run out of time. I'm just gonna go through this slide quickly. And, but I was gonna say, there's a logic to the piece that, with a gavel or like a hammer shape, is meant to drill a hole to attach the handle to it, but that is not the logic of the work. The logic of this work is that all the spindle need to be connected by this 3D print joint. So in a way, I'm just visually lining up them, and in order to do this, you end up to have this really interesting cluster. You see what I mean? So the formal decision I made is based on an idea. So if I were to go and try to, actually, there's so much I can talk about this week. So a lot, there's some idea of making a specific cluster to it, like the bowling pin cluster or this gavel cluster, but a lot of the in-between part is improvised, and it's meant, and then is deliberate, because it's about negotiation, and all this wood have different length. I mean, in a way, someone joked, oh, this is like a Lego, it's 3D puzzle, but I was like, yes, it's like a 3D puzzle. It has a certain modular quality to it, but it's actually not exactly modular because they're all different length. They have different weight. So in order for these things to work, so they all the different length and different weight, different shape, and different references must come together and enter into negotiation to achieve this sort of equilibrium. And then the way that I like to think about it is as if they are a subject, that they join the fight against gravity. So that's sort of how I conceive the work. And this is a cluster that references Moroccan architecture, and again, instead of putting wood together, so I visually line them up in that sense. And I'm gonna skip through this and show you. That's what I'm talking about. And then the ice hockey stick, because I saw the recent Winter Olympic, the very first time North Korea and South Korea in a joint team. And I don't know why, but the first ever historic joint team is women ice hockey, which is really interesting to me. And the next thing I know is I must carve the ice hockey stick for this show because it's about negotiation, between capitalism and communism. So I want to address that. And this is a shot of the lathe by workers in Morocco. And then can you see that he's actually using his toe to hold the chisel? It's not motorized, it's all done by hand. It's kind of amazing technology. And then I embraced the mistake that on my 3D printer, and one day, I don't know what happened, I checked the news, there was no earthquake in LA, but it shifted, and then I thought, what an interesting shape. And I don't know if you can tell, so this work is also a contrast in terms of sculptural term. I combine wood turning, which is carving, which is subtraction. You subtract material, and the 3D printing is addition. So you build up material. It's built up in layer. And then the lathe, the turning is a really old technology, and the 3D printer is new technology. I like to put them into negotiation with each other. And so when it's printing and then it's shifted, all the filament is like drawn by gravity and pulled down, and I find that really beautiful. I end up incorporate that into, that's at one point, anyway, so you know what a lathe looks like. So I want to show you this, we're ending, I promise you, I'm over time already, but as you know, I don't know if you know, there's a huge protest that broke out in June, which is after the show opened. This show opened on May 8th. I might be wrong, something like that. So even though I titled, some of this idea has kind of uncanny relations to what is going in Hong Kong. So is it really interesting for me to think about this work in the context of these ongoing protests in Hong Kong. And I would say we are, actually the main title of the biennial is called May You Live in Interesting Times, and I feel like it's such a curse to me or to all of us that we are indeed living in interesting times. And when I was making this work way before the protests happened, our world is already in a kind of tense moment that there's increasingly division among us. And to me, it seems like we kind of lack the capacity to communicate to people who are very different than us. So in a way, the work was meant to address some of these differences and try to come up with a way to bring things together and encourage the idea of having agency and being a stakeholder. But at the same time, of course, I don't think it's an entire coincidence that I'm representing Hong Kong and the protests happened and the title is called Stakeholder. So, anyways, these are the way that the protests are doing their using post-it note. So it's sort of like a nomadic graffiti that they're doing this, and then the next day was taken away by some other anti-protester in Venice. And then it came back again with more graphic depiction of the protest. And then actually, in solidarity with the protest, we closed the pavilions for a day. And then, I don't know, for some of you who can read Chinese, this is kind of like a funny joke, because, again, this is really strange, because at one point, the chief executive, Carrie Lam, was condemning the increasing violent act of the protester and saying that, oh, they don't care about the society because they keep, they go around and destroy the subway station because they have no stake in society. And I was just appalled by how could you say that these young people have no stake in society? So, and then on the internet, there are people making fun of her and saying, maybe she didn't mean no stake, maybe she mean no stick. Because at one point, there was rumor going that the gangster in Hong Kong is in collusion with the police and got out of the street and holding stick and just like randomly hit people. It's like a kind of domestic terrorism. These guys in the white shirt. So, but versus the protester, they are not holding this stick, but they are putting the nomadic post-it note on their body as a form of resistance, art of resistance. I think I'm going to end here to answer some question. How about that? Sorry, I try. I really hate to go over time, but sometimes it's hard. Yes.